Maria had always been different from other girls in her town. While many dreamed of becoming teachers or singers, Maria dreamed of helping people in war, not as a fighter, but as a medic and someone who could stop the bleeding, hold the pain, and save lives. She believed that even in war, kindness had power. When she joined the Army's medical training, everyone was surprised. Some laughed behind her back. "She's too soft," they whispered. "She'll cry the first time she sees blood." But Maria didn't cry. Not once. She watched every lesson carefully, practiced for hours, and read her books under a small lamp late into the night. She wanted to be ready for anything. After training, she was posted to Camp Riverstone, a dusty base near the edge of the conflict zone. The camp was always loud. Boots marching, radios buzzing, trucks coming and going. Maria didn't say much. She kept her head down, followed orders, and focused on learning everything she could. Soon, the soldiers noticed that she worked harder than anyone else. She didn't complain even when her shifts were long. And her hands, though gentle, were fast and steady. She cleaned wounds, gave injections, stitched deep cuts, and comforted soldiers in pain. Some of them began to trust her. They would say, "If I ever get shot, I want Maria to be there." But others still saw her as weak. Not because she was bad at her job, but because she wasn't a fighter. Because she didn't carry a weapon. Because she was a woman. One afternoon during a break, Maria sat under a tree eating from a small metal box. A young soldier named Ray walked by. Laughing with his friends, he threw something onto her lap. Maria looked down. It was a toy rifle, small and plastic. "Just in case you change your mind," Ray said with a smirk. His friends laughed and walked away. Maria didn't say a word. She picked up the toy gun, held it for a moment, then quietly placed it in her pocket. Not because she liked the joke, but because she had made a decision. She would never let anyone make her feel small again. That night, while everyone slept, Maria opened her locker and pulled out something hidden under her clothes. An old, rusted rifle manual she had found weeks ago. She had cleaned it and kept it safe. Now she opened it, reading every line, every picture. She didn't want to fight, but she wanted to be ready. In case no one else could protect the wounded, she practiced how to hold a gun, how to stand, how to aim quietly, in the shadows like a ghost in uniform. The next morning, she returned to her duties like nothing had changed. She helped carry a wounded soldier from a truck. Her hands steady, her eyes sharp, she told herself. "Saving lives is my mission, but if I must, I will do more." One evening, as the sun fell behind the mountains, Maria stood alone outside the medical tent. The wind was dry, and the sky was red with dust. She looked at the hills far away, where the enemy moved in silence. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel something heavy in the air, like the calm before a storm. She thought about her parents, about her village, about the quiet life she had left behind. She wasn't the same girl anymore. She had seen death, stitched, torn flesh, heard last words whispered through blood. She had cried in silence, alone in the tent when no one was watching. But she had never run, never broken, never backed away. Maria was still the girl behind the bandages. But now behind those bandages there was also fire. The kind of fire that doesn't burn things, and it builds strength. She didn't need to shout or carry medals. She just needed one moment. One chance to prove that courage doesn't always come with a gun. Sometimes it comes with steady hands, a brave heart, and the will to step forward, even when no one believes in you. Maria walked through Camp Riverstone with quiet steps. The boots on her feet were too big, the uniform a bit loose, but her eyes were sharp. She moved like a shadow, always there when someone cried out in pain, always there with a needle, a bandage, or a word of comfort. But behind her back the mockery never stopped. Some soldiers called her Angel, not out of respect, but as a joke. Others said she was just playing nurse in a place meant for warriors. No matter how many lives she saved, they still saw her as soft. One morning, during equipment check, Sergeant Cole shouted across the yard, "Medics don't fight. Remember that." He wasn't talking to Maria, but everyone looked at her. Some laughed, others just smirked. Maria kept her eyes low, lips pressed together, but deep inside, something cold began to grow, not anger, not sadness, something harder. She returned to the medical tent and picked up a tray of bandages. She worked with her head down, hands moving like clockwork. A soldier walked in with a deep gash on his leg, blood dripping on the floor. She didn't flinch, she cleaned the wound, stitched it in 7 clean loops and wrapped it tight. The soldier looked at her with wide eyes. "You're not scared of blood?" he asked. Maria gave a small smile. "I've seen worse," she said and turned away. That night, Maria sat alone behind the mess hall staring at the sky. Stars blinked above like they were trying to send her a message. She pulled the old rifle manual from her bag and opened it again. Her fingers traced the pages like they were maps to another world, a world where she didn't have to wait for someone else to protect her. From the shadows, a voice called out, "You studying to be a sniper now?" It was Ray again, his voice full of laughter. He stepped closer and tossed something at her feet. It was another toy rifle, this time painted pink. "Thought this one would match your lipstick," he said. Grinning, Maria picked it up, turned it slowly in her hands. Her face showed no emotion. Then she stood up, walked over to a nearby barrel and tossed the toy inside. It landed with a hollow sound. She didn't say a word, but Ray's smile faded, just a little. The next morning, there was weapons training at the far end of the base. Maria wasn't required to attend. Medics weren't given rifles, but she went anyway, standing at a distance, watching every move. She memorized how the soldiers stood, how they breathed before pulling the trigger. She whispered the steps under her breath. Aim, exhale, squeeze. Not pull, squeeze. She borrowed an old rifle from a friendly supply officer. No bullets, just wait. Every night after her shift, she practiced in secret behind the tent. How to load, how to reload, how to duck and fire. The rifle felt heavy in her arms, but not impossible. Like holding a secret she wasn't supposed to know. She didn't tell anyone, not even the other medics. It wasn't about proving something to them. It was about being ready, not just to save lives, but to survive. One evening during a surprise drill, loud explosions echoed across the camp. Smoke filled the air, and soldiers ran in every direction. Maria didn't panic. She ran toward the wounded, 3 men lying near the supply truck. Bleeding and coughing, she tore open her bag, pressed gauze to wounds, tied tourniquets with practiced hands. While others ducked for cover, she moved like water. Calm, fast, everywhere at once. Later, the commander approached her. "You're brave," he said, "but remember, medics don't fight." Maria looked at him, her face unreadable. "I know," she said quietly. "But sometimes the fight finds us." He didn't respond. Just stared at her for a long moment, then walked away. Back in her tent, Maria cleaned the practice rifle with care. Every night it gleamed a little more. It wasn't a weapon to her, and it was a promise. That if the day came when no one else could protect the wounded, she would be ready. Maria wasn't born a warrior. But under the uniform, beneath the gentle voice and healing hands, steel was forming, slow, silent, unbreakable. And one day, the world would see what happens when the girl they ignored becomes the last one standing between life and death. The sun rose over Camp Riverstone with a dull, red glow. The heat was already pressing down, thick and heavy. In the mess hall, soldiers ate in silence, the kind of silence that says something is coming, something no one wants to face. A message had arrived at dawn. A convoy was needed. Supplies had to be delivered to village Haraz, a small town near the edge of enemy territory. It was supposed to be simple, just food, medicine and fuel, but everyone knew that route. They called it Dead Man's Bend, narrow roads, thick trees, sharp turns, and no radio signal for miles. It was a perfect place for an ambush. Sergeant Cole read the names from a list. Drivers, guards, and 1 medic. Nobody moved. Nobody volunteered. They all looked at the ground, hoping not to be picked. Maria stood near the back, holding her bag close to her chest. Her name wasn't on the list, but she stepped forward anyway. "I'll go," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The room turned toward her like someone had shouted. Cole stared at her, surprised, then frowned. "You're not on this list," he said. "I can be," Maria answered. "You sure about that?" He asked. "It's not a hero's ride." Maria nodded. "I'm not going to be a hero," she said. "I'm going to help." No one clapped, no one smiled. They just looked at her with that strange mix of doubt and something else. Maybe respect. Maybe fear. An hour later, the convoy was ready. 2 trucks, an armored jeep, 5 soldiers, 1 medic, and a driver named Malik who never spoke. Maria climbed into the back of the second truck, sat beside crates of bandages and canned food. She checked her bag, bandages, morphine, water, and, hidden under the gauze, her practice rifle. No bullets, just weight. Still, it made her feel like she wasn't walking into the unknown with empty hands. The trucks moved out slowly at first, then faster once they cleared the main gate. The road twisted like a snake through the hills. Dust rose behind them like smoke. Maria watched the trees, her hands resting quietly on her lap. For a while, everything was calm. They passed a small village where children waved from behind fences. Old women watched from porches, faces like dry paper. Maria waved back, a soft smile on her lips. But as the road narrowed and the forest grew thicker, the air began to change. Even the birds seemed to go silent. Malik slowed the truck. Eyes scanning every shadow, the radio crackled. Then went dead. Maria sat still, every muscle tight. She remembered what the commander had said. Medics don't fight. But this wasn't about fighting. This was about surviving. At the bend in the road, just past a broken milestone, Malik hit the brakes. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice flat. Ahead. The lead truck had stopped. No movement, no signal. Just the eerie silence of waiting. Then it happened. A deafening explosion tore through the air. The front truck burst into flames, metal flying like knives. Screams followed, and then gunfire. From the trees, from the hills, from everywhere, an ambush. Bullets slammed into the sides of the trucks. Soldiers ducked, returning fire, shouting orders. Maria hit the floor of the truck, heart racing, hands shaking, but she didn't scream. She reached for her bag, pulled it close. She could hear someone crying out, "Injured! We've got one down." Maria didn't wait. She crawled out of the truck, loaded the ground. Bullets snapped overhead like insects. Smoke filled her nose. But she pushed forward. A young soldier, barely older than a boy, was bleeding from his side. She pressed her hand to the wound, tore open her kit, and worked fast. The ground shook around her, but her hands didn't stop. "Medic." "Another one," someone called out from behind a rock. Maria moved again, faster now. She reached a second man with a leg wound, tied a tourniquet, dragged him behind cover. Still no backup, still no radio. They were alone. She saw one of the soldiers fall, chest hit. No movement. Maria screamed for help, but no one came. She looked down at the rifle hidden under her supplies. Her breath caught in her throat. She hesitated for only a second, then she grabbed it. She had no bullets, no real training, but she stood up behind the truck, aimed at the ridge, and pulled the trigger. The click echoed like a gunshot anyway. The enemy ducked, thinking they were under more fire than expected. That moment gave her enough time to pull another wounded soldier to safety. They held the line until the sound of approaching engines roared in the distance. Backup had arrived. The attackers scattered into the hills, gone like ghosts, but the silence they left behind was heavy with blood. Maria dropped the rifle and fell to her knees, covered in dirt and ash. Her hands shook, her eyes burned. But she had done what no one expected her to do. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to fight. But when the mission nobody wanted turned into a nightmare, Maria didn't run. She rose. The convoy limped back to Camp Riverstone just before midnight. The front truck was gone, blown apart and left behind in pieces. The survivors were silent, faces hollow, hands shaking, eyes refusing to blink. Maria sat in the back of the jeep, blood dried on her sleeves. Her lips cracked from smoke and dust. She didn't speak. No one asked her to at the gate. The guards didn't salute. They just stepped aside, eyes wide at the sight of the wounded. Maria helped carry a soldier out, his legs still wrapped in makeshift gauze. She looked up at the stars, then at the ground, her mind still stuck on the bend in the road. The sound of bullets, the screams, the fire. It played on repeat, not loud but constant. Like a whisper inside her bones, the medics worked through the night. Maria didn't rest. She washed her hands, changed gloves, and kept going. Chest wound, shoulder tear, cracked ribs. She moved from one soldier to another, her fingers moving faster than her thoughts. A nurse tried to stop her. "You need to sleep," she said. Maria just shook her head and reached for the next patient. When the sun rose, the commander called her in. His office was quiet, the blinds half closed. He didn't sit behind the desk. He stood near the window, hands behind his back. "You went into a hot zone," he said. Maria said nothing. "You weren't authorized to carry a weapon, still." Silence. "You broke protocol," he added. Turning toward her, Maria looked him in the eye. "I also kept 3 men from dying," she said. He stared at her for a long time, then nodded once. "Get some rest?" "Medic," he said, voice softer than before. Maria left the office, but the silence followed her. It was inside her now, a road she walked alone. Her sleep was light. Haunted by smoke and the click of her empty rifle, she woke with her heart racing, gasping for air that wasn't filled with gunpowder. And always the sound of boots, marching, stomping, coming closer in her dreams. A few days later, the base felt different. People looked at Maria, but no one laughed anymore. They nodded quietly or stepped aside. Ray, the same soldier who once threw her a toy gun, left a small tin of tea on her cot. He didn't say a word, he didn't have to. But Maria wasn't the same either. She walked slower now, watched everything more carefully. She kept her medical bag by her side, but her hands often brushed over the hidden rifle inside. She hadn't fired a real shot, but the weight of the decision to hold it, to raise it, had changed something inside her. One morning she stood near the edge of the training field. Recruits were doing drills, shouting with energy, guns slung across their backs. Maria watched in silence, her mind far away. A young recruit looked over at her and whispered, "That's her." His friend nodded. "She's the one who walked into the fire." They looked at her like she was some kind of legend. But Maria didn't feel brave, she just felt tired. Later, she sat under the tree where she used to read. The same place where Ray once mocked her. Now it was quiet, birds fluttering in the branches. She pulled out a notebook from her bag, not to write, but to remember. She wrote one line. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the will to move while shaking." She closed the book and leaned back. The wind was gentle on her face. She could hear laughter in the distance, boots hitting the ground, the clang of metal. But something was missing, that bend in the road, that awful silence. It had followed her back like a shadow. Maria knew she was safe now, but only for a while. The war wasn't over, and the line between medic and soldier was thinner than ever. She remembered the boy with the chest wound. Gasping for air, she had held his hand until he passed out. She remembered how light his body felt as she dragged him across the rocks, how heavy her own legs had become. She wondered if she had changed forever, or if this was who she had been all along. Someone quiet, someone soft but not weak, someone who could carry pain and still keep walking. They called it the road to silence, but for Maria, it was more than that. It was the road to truth. The truth that even the kindest hands may one day need to carry a weapon, not to take life but to protect it. The sun was burning high the day Maria was sent back out. Not even a week had passed since the last mission. Her hands were still sore from the bandages, her eyes still red from sleepless nights, but orders came fast, and in war, there was no waiting. Another convoy, another village in need. The name was Kandor Hollow, deeper into the hills, surrounded by cliffs and narrow trails, too far for air support, too risky for tanks. But the people there were starving, and their clinic had run out of supplies. And so the convoy was sent, and 5 soldiers, 2 trucks, 1 medic. Maria didn't hesitate. She packed her bag the same way as before. Medical kit, water, morphine, clean gauze, and beneath it all, the rifle. This time it wasn't empty. Malik, the silent driver, had slipped her a small box of rounds the night before. He didn't say a word, just placed it on her cot and walked away. Maria stared at the box for a long time. Then she loaded the rifle and closed the bag. The drive to Kandor was quiet. The road curved like a ribbon between rocks and dust. The mountains rose like sleeping giants on both sides. Maria sat beside crates of canned food, watching the horizon. She could feel it again, and that silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that held its breath. The kind that waits to break. The lead truck slowed near a sharp turn. Malik tapped the brakes, frowning. Maria looked ahead, saw the small ridge above them, the perfect hiding place. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag. Then came the flash, a thunderclap in daylight. The lead truck exploded, torn into fire and metal, Screams followed, sharp and real. Gunfire rained from the cliffs. Loud and sudden, the ambush had begun. Maria's truck jerked to the side, slamming into a rock. She was thrown against the crates, her head ringing, but she didn't freeze. She grabbed her bag, kicked the door open, and crawled into the dust. Bullets snapped past her ears. The smell of burning oil filled the air. And in the chaos, she heard it, a soldier screaming. He was alive but pinned under wreckage. She crawled low, heart pounding. Her uniform was soaked in sweat and ash. She reached the wounded man, saw blood pouring from his leg. With one hand, she tore a strip of cloth, tied a tourniquet. With the other, she reached into her bag and pulled out the rifle. Shots cracked above her. She saw movement on the ridge, silhouettes firing down without mercy. No one else could move. One soldier had a broken arm. Another was unconscious. The rest were pinned behind the smoking truck. It was her, alone, exposed. Maria took a deep breath. Her hands trembled as she raised the rifle. She had practiced 100 times in the dark. But now this was real. She aimed, her finger tight on the trigger, and fired. The recoil shocked her, but the bullet hit the rock near the attacker's feet. He ducked back, giving her a moment. She fired again, this time closer. Another shot, and the firing from the ridge slowed. The enemy didn't expect return fire from a medic. They didn't know she had trained for this moment. Maria crawled to the side, dragging the wounded soldier behind cover. She kept firing in short bursts, just enough to hold them off. Then she heard footsteps. Someone was flanking the convoy. She turned fast, saw a man approaching with a rifle raised. Without thinking, she aimed and fired a single shot. The man fell. She stared at his body. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands were shaking now, her chest tight, but she didn't stop. More enemy fighters retreated up the hill. Backup was still far away, but the ambush had failed. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected her. When the shooting finally stopped, all that remained was smoke, groans, and the heavy silence of after. Maria stood in the middle of it, her rifle lowered, her face covered in dust and tears. She walked back to the wreckage, checking each body, treating the living, closing the eyes of the fallen. She didn't speak. She just worked. When reinforcements arrived an hour later, they found her kneeling beside Malik. He had taken a hit to the chest but was still breathing. She had packed the wound with gauze and pressed her hands over it the entire time. "She saved us," one soldier whispered. "Alone," said another. The commander radioed in. Stunned by what he heard back at camp, word spread like wildfire. The medic who picked up a rifle, the woman they once mocked, had become the reason 5 men were still alive. But Maria didn't ask for praise. She didn't look for thanks. She sat under a tree outside the tent that night, her rifle across her lap, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to cry, not because she was weak, but because she had been strong for too long. The next morning, the camp was silent, not the kind of silence before battle, but the kind that comes after something sacred has been broken. Maria sat alone inside the medical tent, washing her hands over and over again. The water ran red, then pink, then clear. Still she kept scrubbing. The rifle lay on the cot beside her, wrapped in a clean towel. It looked out of place in a space filled with stethoscopes and surgical scissors. But Maria didn't move it. She just stared at her hands, the same hands that had closed wounds, now stained with something heavier than blood. Outside, soldiers moved quietly. They didn't laugh, didn't shout across the yard like before. They looked at her differently now, not with pity, not even with surprise, but with something deeper, like they had seen a ghost rise from smoke and become something more than just a medic. Later that day, Commander Rafi called her in. He wasn't sitting at his desk this time. He stood, arms folded, his face unreadable. "I read the report," he said. "You were the only one standing during the ambush." Maria said nothing. "You picked up a rifle," he continued, "and fired." She nodded, slow and steady. "You killed someone," he said. More softly now, Maria's eyes didn't flinch. "I saved 5 others," she replied. The commander looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You've changed," he said. "No," Maria whispered. "I just stopped waiting for permission." That night, a storm rolled over the mountains. Rain slammed against the tents, lightning split the sky. Maria lay in her cot, unable to sleep. She kept hearing the shot, that one shot that changed everything, not just because someone fell, but because something inside her stood up. She had never wanted to be a fighter, but war doesn't wait for who you want to be. It turns you into what others need, and in that moment, they had needed her to be more than just the girl behind the bandages. The next morning, Ray came to her tent. He looked nervous, hands behind his back like a schoolboy. He started, then stopped. He held out a small black box. Maria opened it. Inside was a custom grip for her rifle, engraved with the word, Protector. I thought maybe, you should have this, he said quietly. Maria looked at the gift, then at him. I didn't do it to be remembered, she said. Ray nodded. I know, he replied. That's why we will. The gift spread through the camp faster than any story. Some called her the fire medic. Others simply called her Doc. But when new recruits arrived and asked about her, the veterans only said one thing. She doesn't speak much. But when she moves, can watch her hands, Maria continued her work. She still treated wounds, still held dying soldiers and whispered comfort into their ears. But something had changed in her rhythm. Her footsteps were heavier, her voice calmer, her eyes older. She now carried her rifle openly, not slung over her back, but gently laid beside her bag. She cleaned it with the same care she gave her surgical tools, not because she loved it, but because she respected what it meant. It was no longer just a weapon. It was the line between chaos and care, the fire in her hands. Not to burn men, but to shield. One afternoon, a new soldier burst into the camp with shrapnel in his shoulder. Blood soaked through his uniform. Panic in his eyes, he grabbed Maria's sleeve, his voice trembling. Please don't let me die. Maria steadied him, looked him in the eyes. You won't, she said. Not maybe, not I'll try, just one quiet promise. And in that moment he believed her more than any prayer. She operated in silence, her hands swift and sure. Around her, soldiers watched with the kind of respect words couldn't explain. One leaned over to a new recruit and whispered, She's the reason I'm alive. That night, Maria sat by the fire pit staring at the flames. They danced like memories, and fast, beautiful, and dangerous. Malik joined her, his chest still healing. He handed her a tin cup of tea. No one expects you to carry it all, he said gently. Maria looked at the flames, then at her hands. I know, she said. But I can, not because she was fearless, but because even fear couldn't stop her anymore. Not after what she'd seen. Not after what she'd done. The fire wasn't just in her rifle. It was in her hands, her heart, her footsteps. She had become more than a medic. She was now the one others ran toward when everything else fell apart. And the fire, it didn't burn her down. It lit the path forward. The morning air at Camp Riverstone was crisp and unusually quiet. A low fog curled around the barracks and tents from a distance. The camp looked like a forgotten village resting on a cloud. But inside everything was awake, everyone was watching. Maria stood in front of the medical tent. Adjusting her sleeves, her uniform was wrinkled. Her boots still dust-covered from last night's emergency. She hadn't slept. Again, there had been a surprise mortar attack near the North Ridge, and Maria had worked through the night. 2 lives saved, 1 lost still. She had shown up on time for morning formation. But this morning was different. The soldiers weren't whispering or laughing as she passed. They stood straighter, eyes steady when she walked by. They didn't look away like before, they nodded, small. Respectful, meaningful. Word had spread not just about the ambush, not just about the way she picked up a rifle, but about what came after, how she worked, how she carried the broken, how she stayed when others froze. They had started calling her the Shield, not because she fought, but because she stood between death and the wounded and never flinched. That morning, Commander Rafi called her name in front of the entire unit. Maria stepped forward, unsure what to expect. The sun was rising behind her, casting a soft gold across the faces of tired men and women. Rafi cleared his throat, holding a small folder in his hand. This soldier, he began, was never trained to fight. But when the bullets came, she fought. He paused, eyes moving across the crowd. She was never asked to lead, but when others fell, she took command without a single order. And when we think of bravery, We often imagine loud things, explosions, shouting, charging forward. But courage can be quiet too. It can wear gloves and carry gauze. He stepped forward and placed a small metal badge in Maria's palm. It wasn't shiny or grand, just a simple silver star. Not for combat, not for rank, but for exceptional duty and moments beyond duty. Maria looked at it. Unsure what to do, then something happened one by one. The soldiers in front of her began to raise their hands. Not to clap, not to cheer, but to salute. Ray was the first. Standing straight, eyes locked on her. Then Malik, still with his healing chest. Then every soldier in that courtyard, arms raised in unison. A wave of silent honor that said more than any words. Maria's throat tightened. She didn't know how to respond. So she did what she always did, nodded once, humbly, and stepped back. Later that day, she walked past the motor pool where two young recruits were arguing about bandage techniques. When they saw her, they both straightened. "Ma'am, can you show us how you wrapped Sergeant Lee's leg during the ambush?" One asked. Maria blinked, surprised. "Why?" she asked. "And because it held," he said, "and we want to learn from the best." She knelt beside them and showed them slowly, carefully, no pride, just focus. When she finished, one of them whispered, "I used to think medics just patched us up. Now I know some of them save us before the fight's even over." That evening, Maria found a letter on her cot, folded neatly, unsigned. It read, "I used to think strength was how loud a man could shout. But now I know real strength is silent, steady, and never asks for permission to save a life. Thank you for reminding us what it means to be brave." She read it twice, then placed it inside her journal. The same one where she had once written, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the will to move while shaking." As the sun disappeared beyond the hills, Maria stood outside the tent looking toward the fading sky. She could still feel the weight of the rifle across her back. Not heavy, not anymore. She had grown into it, and now, when someone shouted medic across the base, they weren't just calling for help, they were calling for her. Not just because she could stop bleeding, but because she never backed down from where the pain lived. Because she was willing to carry both the wounded and the fear. Maria didn't need a ceremony or a parade. She had been given something rarer, trust. The quiet kind that lives in glances and nods, in soldiers who no longer doubt, and in every salute raised to her now. There wasn't just respect. There was something else, gratitude. Not for what she had done, but for who she had become. The war didn't end with a bang. It ended the way most things do, and quietly, slowly, like fog lifting from a field. No announcement, no celebration, just fewer orders, fewer patrols, and silence where chaos used to live. Maria stood at the edge of the camp, watching the hills in the distance. She had memorized every curve of the land, every stone, every shadow where danger once waited. Now it was just earth and sky again. Camp Riverstone was being dismantled piece by piece, tents packed away, supplies loaded onto trucks, soldiers reassigned or sent home. The war had left scars, not all of them visible, but it had also revealed things, like who people became when everything else was stripped away. Maria walked through the empty medical tent one last time. The beds were bare, the shelves cleaned. She touched the edge of the stretcher where she had once brought back a soldier from the edge of death. She remembered the faces, not all their names, but their eyes, their voices, their silence when the pain was too much. She had carried so many, and now, she carried the memories as she packed her things. She reached for the rifle one last time. It felt different now, not like a weapon, not like a burden, just a part of her story. She wrapped it in cloth and placed it gently in her bag. Outside, Ray was waiting, leaning against a truck. He had a scar across his cheek now, one he never talked about. When he saw her, he smiled, tired but real. "They're sending me home," he said. Maria nodded. "Good," she replied. "You?" he asked. "Same," she answered. "Somewhere quieter." He paused, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "I never told you," he said, "but I wrote a report after the ambush." He handed it to her. She opened it, scanned the first few lines, then looked up. "You called me essential personnel," she said with a small smile. Ray shrugged. "You were the only reason I'm still breathing." She folded the paper, slid it into her journal, Thanks, she said. No, Ray replied. Thank you. Maria climbed into the back of the departing truck. As the engine roared to life, she looked out over the base one final time. Dust blew across the ground, a few soldiers waved, not with words, just hands raised in farewell, and then they were moving. Away from the camp, away from the war. The road ahead stretched long and empty. But Maria didn't feel lost, she felt steady. The same way she had felt when bullets rained and she stood with her hands trembling but ready. Back home, the world was different. Quieter, cleaner, slower. But some things didn't change. The questions came from neighbors. You were in the war? Did you see action? Did you shoot anyone? Maria never answered in detail. She would just say, I helped people, and that was enough. She opened a small clinic in her hometown. People came with cuts and coughs and broken bones. Children cried less when she treated them. Maybe because her hands were always calm, or maybe because she had once held pain so big that now nothing could shake her. One day, a teenage girl walked into the clinic. She had a burn on her hand and a nervous voice. As Maria treated her, the girl looked up and asked, Were you really a medic in the war? Maria paused, then nodded. Did you ever have to fight? Maria smiled gently. Yes, she said, but only when I had to. The girl blinked, then whispered, Were you scared? Maria thought for a moment, then replied, Every time. But I didn't let fear decide what kind of person I would be. The girl nodded slowly. Holding her bandaged hand, she didn't say anything else. But as she left, she stood a little taller. And Maria watched her go, knowing that even here, even now, healing wasn't just about bandages, it was about truth. That night, Maria opened her journal and read through the pages. She saw old notes, dried tears, smudged ink. Then at the very back, she wrote one final line. Even medics carry fire, and sometimes they must burn through fear to protect what matters. She closed the book, placed it beside her bed, and finally, for the first time in what felt like forever, she slept without dreaming of war.